Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I'm excited because I am over on the Brutus Monroe blog yesterday actually as the May guest designer, or one of the May guest designers. So I'm really excited. I'm going to have a link down below so you can head on over to the blog and check it out and check out all the great stuff they have going on over there. But I have a video for you today as well about the card that I made using some products by Brutus Monroe. I'm going to be using the Outer Space stamp set, but to start I have some watercolor paper and I'm going to be inking with my VIVACE makeup brushes over some the watercolor paper using antique linen. I'm starting off with antique linen. I just have a scrap of that watercolor paper. I'm going to make sure that's dry, but I want to run that through my Big Shot machine with a giant circle die here in a second, but I want to make sure that I have good coverage all over that. I'm trying to make a moon, so it's only going to be a half circle. I'll run that through, and then I'm going to start doing a little bit more blending over the top. And I've got pumice stone, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not really excited about the contrast that I have with the pumice stone, so I pulled out hickory smoke next. And so with that hickory smoke, I'm getting a little bit better contrast for what I was looking for. Now I'm just using my distress sprayer. I'm going to sprinkle some water all over that to kind of give that moon a little bit of look of craters. And then I'll wait for that to dry a little bit, and then I will sop up the rest with a microfiber cloth. And then I'm going to heat that until that is dry. And then I'm going to set that off to the side, which I could have done and let it dry on its own. I could have done that. But the next part is one of the parts that I'm really excited about. So I'm using the Milky Way embossing powder by Brutus Monroe. This stuff is so pretty and it's chunky and it's pretty. So I've got another piece of that watercolor paper and I'm covering it, just sticking my ink pad right over that paper. That's the Versamark ink pad, and that's a sticky ink, and this embossing powder will stick right to that. So I'm going to cover that whole panel. I'm kind of experimenting. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to get. But I am going to experiment. And so now that I've got that coverage, you can tell that those are some big granules of embossing powder. And you don't see me entirely on the screen, sorry about that, but I'm starting with my heat gun on the back just to try to activate those that embossing powder just a little bit before I pull my heat gun to the front. And as you can see how that melts, it's so pretty. Now it is a little bit, because it's chunky, I'm not getting a super smooth look, which it could be okay for whatever you're trying to get. I wanted a little bit smoother look because I'm going for a little bit more of a galaxy background. And so I've covered that once again after I had let that cool with my Versamark ink pad, and then put the embossing powder right over the top once again. And now I'm just heating that back up, and as you can tell, it melts into the background and then it starts to smooth out. So you get this almost like a glassy look. It's really pretty. And I love the bits of black that are in there with all that gold. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous background. And so I'll just keep melting that. And I'm keeping that in there because we all know I love the look of, I love watching embossing powder melt. So it gives this beautiful look. And then I'm going to set that off to the side. Isn't that beautiful? It did warp a little, so I'm going to use some liquid glue, and I'm showing you this because of how much it did warp, keeping in mind that that had 2 layers of the embossing powder right on top. And I'm going to back that with just a slightly bigger black cardstock panel. And then I'm going to set that underneath a few heavy things just to dry, being careful not to let that crack, because if your embossing powder is too thick, you can crack it, which might be the look you're going for as well. So now I'm moving on to stamping my images. I've chosen several of the images from the Outer Space stamp set, and I'm inking those up with Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I'm stamping those onto some scraps of Express It cardstock because I plan to do some Copic coloring, very simple Copic coloring at that. But I've just chosen several of the images. This one is just chock full of cute little outer space images, and there's one of them that's a whole cluster of all kinds of outer space images, which would be so much fun to color. So this is super simple coloring. If I'm using 2 colors or, doing any shadowing, it's just with a couple colors. I'm starting off with R35 on the first planet, and then I'm going to do a little shadowing with R29. Notice that I leave a little bit of a highlight all the way on that edge. That gives it more of a rounded look. And then I'll blend that out with the R35 once again. I'm going to move on to the the very heavily cratered planet, and I'm using YR21 for my base color. And then for the craters and shadowing, I'm going to use Y17. I couldn't resist, I had to use some yellow, and I ended up actually kind of doing a bit of a rainbow, I suppose, with the colors that I've chosen. So I've got G02 for my Saturn looking planet, and then I think it's G09. No, it's G05. And then I'm going to go in with some blues, and those blues are B12 for my lighter color. I thought about leaving the spaceship silver, but I knew I was going to be doing my little astronaut silver, so I chose blues. And then my darker color is B04. Just adding some shading where I think it might be, and then I'll blend that out just a little. And then for my little astronaut, well, actually I go back in and color a little bit more with the red. I'm just using the R29. And then for my astronaut, I'm using the T's. So I've got T1 for my base. And these are very small images. You wouldn't need to go too crazy with your shadowing if you didn't want to, because it might be a little difficult to do. And then my darker shade is T3. And then I'm going to color his little panel in the center just using some YR21. And then I'm going to fussy cut all of these little images out. And now it's time to start assembling my card. So once I've kind of got a little bit of placement of how I want these placed, I realize I need to get my sentiment on there. So I am going to stamp that onto some black cardstock that I have. And I'm just going to use Versamark ink once again, but I'm going to go over that black cardstock with an embossing bag to make sure that I don't have embossing powder sticking to the places I don't want it to. I'll stamp out my sentiment, and then I will cover that with some white embossing powder. And then I'll heat that till that is smooth and melted. So you'll be able to tell that it is completely melted by just holding it up in the light, and you'll be able to tell it's not granulated anymore, and it's kind of shiny. So I let that cool, and then I'm going to wipe off the excess embossing bag powder with a microfiber cloth. That seems to work the best. And then I'm going to trim that down just using my paper cutter. And I did leave just a very tiny spot on the other end of the word moon, and I'm going to do a very small fishtail banner there by cutting into the center and then having each of those ends meet that center where I cut into. And that just gives it a very slight fishtail banner. And now I'm going to start adhering everything. So that panel was still a little bit warped, so I have covered the entire back panel with some foam tape. This is just the Scotch foam tape. And I'll have everything that I've used listed down below in the description box if you're interested in checking any of that out. But now I'm just peeling off the backing paper of that foam tape. And then I'm going to adhere that to a craft card base. And that's my panel's ready to go. So I'll use liquid glue for everything else. I'm going to adhere my moon. And I love the ambiance kind of that the background gives. So that embossed Milky Way embossing powder background, I love it. It almost makes it look like it's the glow from the moon. And I think that's why I love it so much. That embossing powder is so pretty with those specks in there. And Brutus Monroe, I mean, they've got some gorgeous embossing powders. I wish I could have them all. There you go. That's a thought. Maybe I'll just have to do that over time. So I'm adhering all of my planets down. And then I'm going to adhere my little astronaut. It's like he landed on the moon with his little rocket. And then I do decide I don't want them to just look like they're floating, so I do grab that T1 marker once again and add a little shading underneath each of those images. And then for a final bit of embellishment, I have grabbed some Nuvo Dream Drops in the color Cloud 9. It's a bit of a purple when it dries, and you'll be able to see that in the pictures afterwards. But I'm just speckling those all over like stars, and I love how this turns out. I'll pat those down. And then that's going to finish off this card. So as I said, I'm just guest designing over for Brutus Monroe this month, and I'm just excited to be there. Go check out their shop, go check out their blog, see all the great things that they're doing and that the design team is doing. And if you like this video, hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by.